Welcome to AGK's Vinyl Life. I'm your host, Anthony K. And on this episode, I'm doing another tag. That's right, it's tag season. The beginning of the year, tags are all out. I did a couple already. I did the Beatles tag, which will be linked at the end of this video. And before that, I did the vinyl tag of 2024. So those two tags I did over a week ago. I had planned on making more videos last week, but I got tendonitis in a bicep on my arm, so I was out of action for a week, but I'm back now to continue the tags. I do plan on doing two more tags, today's tag and one more hopefully that I will get filmed later in this week. And they are the Prog tag and the metal tag. Today I'm doing the Prog tag, and I hope my daughter making lunch upstairs doesn't cause too much noise in this video, but I got to get this video done. So we're going to do the Prog tag. I'm not going to waste any more time talking, and we're going to get right to it because I got a whole whack of albums to show and 20 questions to answer, and I'd like to try to get this done in as speedy as time as possible. So let's get on with it. This is the Prog tag. I will leave a link in the description of this video to the original Prog tag and the questions, so anybody that wants to hop on the Prog tag can do it themselves. And let's start off with question number one. Show a favorite debut record. Well, this one was super easy for me, and that is Saga and their debut album. And you're going to be seeing a lot of Saga in this video. This video is going to be a chance for me to showcase a couple of my favorite artists of all time, and they're easily able to answer a number of questions in this tag. So you're going to be seeing a lot of Saga, you'll be seeing a lot of another band, but it's my chance to promote one of my favorite bands of all time. My single favorite Canadian band of all time is Saga, and probably my favorite prog band of all time is Saga as well. So Saga's debut album, I love. This is a 10 out of 10. It's just a spectacular spin. How Long, Humble Stance, Climbing in the Ladder, Will It Be You, Chapter 4, The Perfectionist, Give 'Em the Money, Ice Nice, Tired World. This is prog goodness at its absolute best. So yeah, absolutely my favorite debut prog album of all time, Saga, and their self-titled debut album from 1978. Next up, question number two. Show a prog artist album you got into in 2023 or recently. Well, I got into this artist very recently, and it's another debut album. I got into this artist recently. It's my chance to show off a little progressive metal. These guys are prog metal, very proggy, progressive metal, and it's my chance to shout these guys out because they need to get out there in the world. I did an interview with them on my channel back in December. Check them out. I'm, of course, talking about who's on my t-shirt right here, Visions of Morpheus, and their brand new debut album called Lost Within. This is progressive metal at its absolute best. It's very, very prog. It has a running time of over an hour long. Currently only available on CD. Check them out on visionsofmorpheus.com or on Bandcamp, or they are now streaming on Spotify. This is such a polished, spectacular prog album. Probably the best, in my opinion, prog album of 2023. It's just a spectacular work, and I hope, and I'm really trying to help these guys are right here from Toronto, Ontario, actually Oshawa, Ontario. They are a brand new band, and so I'm happy to help get them out there in the world. Visions of Morpheus, check them out. Check out Lost Within, a spectacular progressive metal album. And you can always get some Vision of Morpheus shirt too. This could even come in as in a question later in this tag about favorite album cover art. Look at that, isn't this spectacular album cover art, which you can see here more clearly than on the CD. Now let's get on, let's keep going. Golden Jubilee is next. Golden Jubilee, show a progressive rock album celebrating 50 years this year. Well, this was my first album, studio album by these guys. This was the album, this is one of my favorite prog albums as well of all time. Just like that Saga, this is up there. This is up there in my top 5 prog albums of all time. Genesis, Lamb Lies Down on Broadway. And this is the half-speed master. And this, in my opinion, is probably the best-sounding copy of Genesis's last Lamb Lies Down on Broadway I've ever owned. It sounds spectacular. The half-speed master from a few years ago Lamb Lies Down on Broadway, celebrating 50 years in 1974. And this was the album that really, really got me heavy into Genesis. And though there was one album that I had before this album, which was my introduction to Genesis, which will be coming up in about 1 second. So celebrating 50 years, the incredible double LP Lamb Lies Down on Broadway by Genesis. Question number 4. Show your favorite live album. Well, it just so happens it's Genesis Live. And this is the album that my first Genesis album I owned. This is actually a really nice UK pressing, a really sweet sounding UK pressing of Genesis Live. And I discovered Genesis by watching the Midnight Special. It was a live concert TV show that was on Friday. I think it was Friday nights or Saturday nights. I think it was Friday nights at midnight. And I used to always watch the Midnight Special. And Genesis came. I didn't know Genesis. They came on. They performed the musical box. I can't remember what the other song is, but I clearly remember them performing the musical box with, of course, Peter Gabriel in this lineup. And I guess they were they were promoting this album pretty much. It was at the time of this album when they made their appearance on Midnight Special. And after seeing them on Midnight Special, I went out and bought this album, which was a new release at the time. It had just come out, Genesis Live. And so this was the album that introduced me to Genesis. And then my first studio, of course, would be Lamb Lies Down. So definitely a favorite live album of all time. But they would follow that up a few years later with Seconds Out, another favorite live album of mine of all time. I just absolutely love Seconds Out. This is, of course, after Peter Gabriel left and Phil Collins was doing the singing. And I absolutely, absolutely love Seconds Out. And just to show something other than Genesis, because we've had 3 Genesis in a row, how about right from this year, from the last Record Store Day, 2023, it's Yes Live at Knoxville Civic Auditorium, November 15th, 1972. This is right in the prime of Yes, with, Anderson, Howe, Squire, Wakeman, and White. This is a Record Store Day live. Is this a triple live? I think it is. Yes, this is a triple live album from Yes, featuring right in their heyday when they were doing Fragile, Close to the Edge, just right in the prime of some of the best Yes there ever was. And this is just a recent live album that was released for Record Store Day, just to show something different. So there you go, Yes Live. And get some Yes on here, because you can't have a Prog Tag without Yes. On to question number 5. Show a non-UK prog band. Well, I showed Saga already. And I could have showed them again, but they're going to be appearing later in this video quite a bit. So I'm going to show another Canadian prog band. And this is another spectacular prog album. Absolutely. This is FM and Black Noise. And this is just a masterpiece of prog. FM, Black Noise, a 3-piece band from Toronto. They even opened up for groups like Rush. They were who was it? Nash the Slash, Martin Deller, and Cameron Hawkins. This if you don't know Black Noise, get it. This is spectacular. Canadian prog at its best. Black Noise, which featured Phasers on Stun, 1 O'Clock Tomorrow, Hours, Journey, Dialing for Dharma, Slaughter and Robot Village, which is spectacular, Alderan, and then the epic Black Noise title track. So Black Noise. Canadian prog, and this was from around 1978, I'm guessing too. 1978, a big year for new prog bands out of Canada. Going on to question number 6. Show a proto-prog album, progressive music prior to In the Court of the Crimson King, which a lot of people call like the first real prog album. Well, In the Court of the Crimson King was released, I looked it up, was released in October of 1969. This album was released only 3 weeks later than In the Court of the Crimson King, but we didn't get it here in North America until a year later in 1974. So until 1970, not 74. What am I thinking? We wouldn't get this until 1970, almost a year later than when it was released, because when it was originally released, it was only released in the Netherlands. And like I said, it was only 3 weeks later than In the Court of the Crimson King. So I think this is pretty close. And this is my favorite band of all time, Golden Earring. And this is the start of their prog era. This is a band that would go through many genres and styles of music, which will come up in a question later in this tag. But in this case, this would be kind of the start of their prog years, because they had a few years where they were doing very proggy music. This is 8 Miles High, of course, them doing a re-envisioning and cover of the Byrds' 8 Miles High on this album. 8 Miles High was a song that was a 45-minute song that they would play live. It was 45 minutes, and they recorded it and had to actually cut it down for this album as well. They did the song on this album in one take. They recorded it in one take, edited it down to a 19-minute version for this. It was a live studio recording done in one take, edited down to a 19-minute version that would take up the entire of side 2. And it is very, very proggy, a very prog version of 8 Miles High. And this bleeds us into the next question, which is, so this is definitely early proto-prog. This bleeds us into the next question, which is number 7. Show an album with an epic song over 10 to 15 minutes long, or whatever you want. Well, there we go. This this bleeds into this with the, of course, 19-minute 8 Miles High. But just to answer that question, I've grabbed a couple more here. How about the fantastic proggy band Focus and Moving Waves, and definitely one of my favorite prog albums of all time. Focus, Moving Waves, and their side 2 with the almost 23-minute song Eruption taking up all of side 2. Eruption, what a great piece of music from Focus. Very proggy there. And their Moving Waves album, which of course had a big smash single in Hocus Pocus. But Eruption on side 2, damn, what a piece of music that is. And one more, why not one more? One of probably the longest song I know of, the longest prog song I know of, Thick as a Brick by Jethro Tull. And this is the limited edition box set that came out a couple of years ago with a hardcover book. It also features the Thick as a Brick part 2, number 2 in here. But it's got the original Thick as a Brick in here, which we'll just slide it out. Thick as a Brick by Jethro Tull. This is probably the longest song as I know of, because it's one song, Thick as a Brick, that takes up both sides of the album for a total running time of around 45 minutes. So I think that's pretty much a pretty darn long song in the way of prog. But this is the spectacular remaster box set that came out a few years ago of Thick as a Brick. And that's number 7. Question number 8. Show an album with a proggy song from a non-proggy artist. Well, that was kind of a tough one for me. You know, I had a little bit of brain freeze trying to come up with one. But I definitely was able to think, this is the first thing that came to the top of my head. And this is a very recent album from 2022, if I remember right. 2022 or 2021, sorry, 2021's album from Iron Maiden, of course, who are a metal band. And this is Senjutsu. And a lot of people, you look it up on Discogs, a lot of people, and I agree, say this is a very proggy. This is Iron Maiden's most proggy album they ever released, hands down. Definitely a very, very proggy album. Senjutsu from Iron Maiden. Some very, very proggy songs on here. So I would say this would qualify as, show an album with a proggy song from a non-proggy artist. Yeah, there's a lot of really proggy songs on Senjutsu by Iron Maiden. So that is my choice for that question. Iron Maiden, Senjutsu. Question number 9. An underrated gem / forgotten favorite / artist or album that is underappreciated. Well, I decided to go with artist, an underappreciated artist. And we're coming back to Saga. That's right, who I showed at the beginning of this video. This is my second showing of Saga, because they, in my opinion, are the single most unappreciated prog artist on the planet, hands down. They are massive in Germany and Europe. Massive in Germany. They're massive in South America, but in North America and Canada, they had limited access. Only their first 7 albums ever got pressed to vinyl. Everything else is on CD. A lot of people don't even realize that Saga, to date, have released 22 studio albums, 9 live albums, multiple compilation albums, and over 30 singles. That's right, Canada's own Saga. So they are, in my opinion, the most unappreciated prog artist on the planet. And just to show you something that you don't see is this one here. This is Saga's Generation 13, and this is the recent remaster. Saga's having all their albums remastered in Germany, and most of them are being released for the first time on vinyl because, like I said, only their first 7 albums of 22 were ever released on vinyl originally, but they have now are remastering all of their albums that were released on CD and releasing them to vinyl. And this particular album came out, I think, around 93 or so. I'm guessing it was around 1993. Can't get the date offhand, but it was around 93 or 94 that Generation 13 came out, which was, does it even say on here? It was their just first time on vinyl. I can't remember where this falls in the lineup without looking it up. So Generation 13, and this was a 2 LP conceptual album. That's right, this was a concept album. It tells a story. It's like The Wall, whatever you want to say. It's a concept album from Saga. In my opinion, the most underappreciated prog artist in the world. So that was question number 9. Question number 10, an album featuring your favorite prog vocalist. Well, that was easy. And we were just talking about Saga, but I'm not going to show you a Saga album because it's an album featuring your favorite prog vocalist. So I decided to just show this one. This album came out in 2022. It is from a Japanese, and this can go down for, show a non-UK prog band. Well, this is a Japanese prog artist, Ryo Okamoto. Ryo Okamoto, who is from Spock's Beard, if people know who Spock's Beard is. And this is the Myth of the I never can pronounce this. The Myth of the Mostrophus. And this is a 2 LP conceptual piece featuring a lot of guest players helping out Ryo Okamoto on this prog masterpiece. What a great album cover, huh? What a great album cover. You can put this down in great album covers of all time. Check that album cover out. But yes, Michael Sadler, vocalist of Saga, who is my favorite prog vocalist of all time, hands down. He still sounds pitch perfect to the way he did in 1978. I saw them last summer, and I'm blessed to be going to see them in May this year again. So Michael Sadler, my favorite prog vocalist of all time, and he is featured on a song on here called Turning Point. He guest stars on a song on Turning Point. And another prog artist that is featured on this album is Steve Hackett on guitar. So there you go. Those are the first 10 questions. We're going to do questions 11 to 20 right after this station break while I make room for the next stack of albums. And of course, today's fit check, wearing a little bit of Pink Floyd here with my Animals hat. And of course, the Visions of Morpheus t-shirt that you can get from visionsofmorpheus.com. And we'll be right back after this. And we're back with question number 11. Moving on, here's the final 10 questions. Question number 11 is it prog? Show an album you describe as art rock. Well, definitely, this was a no-brainer for me. Another one of my favorite bands of all time. They only made, I think it was 6 studio albums. But I love these guys. Bill Nelson fronting the band. They were Bebop Deluxe out of the UK, and this is their debut album. So here's another favorite debut album. This is Axe Victim. Bebop Deluxe were definitely classified as art rock, prog rock, but mostly art rock. They were definitely one of the absolute artiest of art rock bands out there. Bebop Deluxe, who don't get shown enough in the vinyl community, and this is their brilliant Axe Victim debut album from Bebop Deluxe. Art rock at its absolute best. That was question number 11. Question number 12. Show a solo album of an artist from a prog band. Well, I decided to do something a little different for that one. I mean, obviously could have shown you something like, Peter Gabriel or Phil Collins. But I'm going to go with something a little different. And I'm showing Emerson, Lake and Palmer's Works album. That's right, Emerson, Lake and Palmer. Another one of my favorite prog bands of all time. Emerson, Lake and Palmer. and their Works album. And the reason why I'm calling this, putting this in that question of what was it? Show a solo album of an artist from a prog band. Well, this is kind of a solo album because side one is the brilliant Keith Emerson doing piano and keyboard songs. It's a solo keyboard, solo side of Keith Emerson. Then side B, you've got a solo side of Greg Lake. Greg Lake solo on side 2. Side 3, we have Carl Palmer solo. So it's like 3 solo albums in one. You got Keith Emerson solo, Greg Lake solo, Carl Palmer solo, and then on side 4, they all get together and do a 4th side of Emerson, Lake, and Palmer. So I thought I'd show something a little different in Emerson, Lake, and Palmer's Works. I love that album. Absolutely love every single track on that album. Fantastic. Fanfare for a Common Man. But things like the solo things like Keith Emerson's Piano Concerto No. 1. Greg Lake's Lend Your Love to Me Tonight or C'est La Vie. Carl Palmer, The Enemy God. LA Nights. And a reworking of Tank from their first album. And then, of course, Fanfare for a Common Man and Pirates. So a great album. Round 13. Jack of all trades, master of all. Show a genre-bending album or artist. I'm going with genre-bending artist. And I'm bringing back Golden Earring because, in my opinion, absolutely, definitely genre-bending artist. They were around. They started in 1961. Their first album was 1965. They went right through till 2021, constantly changing their style, their sound to keep up with the times. They have been everything. So I got to give a shout out to my favorite artist of all time. And I'm going to show a bunch of albums real quick. Golden Earrings, their debut album. This is Beatles. You put this on, you'll think you're listening to the Beatles. This is bebop at its best. Golden Earrings started out. Beatles were Golden Earrings' #1 influence in making this album. So this is very Beatlesque, early Beatlesque, like 1964 Beatlesque, 1965 Beatles. So very beat bop. And then move into like 1969 and their double album on the double, and this was psych at its finest. They went from bebop to psych. They did a number of albums that were pure psych before transitioning from psych into prog. And of course their prog masterpiece, in my opinion, is of course Moontan, my favorite album of all time from these guys. But I love these guys, and these guys, once again, another band that has done close to 25 studio albums, 9 live albums, just a massive library. But definitely Moontan, a prog masterpiece in my opinion. So they went proggy there. In the 80s, they moved into the 80s that sound with albums like The Hole, where Cesar, the drummer, played synthetic drums, electric drums on this album. So it's a very 80s new wavy sounding kind of beat coming out of Golden Earring during this period. In the 90s, they would record 3 different live acoustic albums. That's right, acoustic. They would jump on the acoustic train and play some acoustic stuff as well. So genre defining there. And then they would, of course, return and do more rock. And they rocked out, and this is their 2012 album, Tits and Ass, which is just straight up rock and roll all the way. So definitely Golden Earring, a genre bending band that have played every genre of rock and roll under the sun. And moving on to question, and that takes us to question number 14. They are definitely, Golden Earring, definitely jack of all trades. And they are moving on to number 14 now. The 80s called. Show an album from the 80s. Well, I've already shown some albums from the 80s in here, but just to have an official album from the 80s, I'm going to show Yes Again, and one of my favorite Yes albums of all time. In my top 3, up there with like albums like Drama is in my top 3 albums. I'm not going to say what my number 1 is today. Maybe I'll tell you in a later video. But this one definitely in my top 3 Yes albums of all time. I love this album. Big Generator. This is the Friday Music remaster. This sounds incredible. And this is definitely 80s at their best. You could even also go, say, a later question coming in here. Prog goes pop. There's definitely some pop on here. But this is definitely some great 80s prog. Big Generator from Yes, with, of course, The Rhythm of Love. Shoot High, Aim Low. Love Will Find a Way. Just a spectacular spin. So there you go. 80s calling. Big Generator by Yes. We're going into now Not Dead Yet. Question number 15. Not Dead Yet. Show a late career album. Well, I'm going to pull up Saga again, guys. That's right. Saga is making their next return on this video, because Saga are still around. They're still making studio albums, not only touring, because a lot of bands are strictly touring now, their old music, and they're not making new music. Saga is still making new music, and this is their album from 2020, I think it is 2021. This is their album from 2021, Symmetry, and this is a genre bending album from Saga. It is prog, yes, but it's genre bending in that in this Saga release, their latest studio album from 2021, they would take and reimagine songs from all their previous albums. So it's not a greatest hits, because they're reimagining songs on this album and they're playing them differently, and they're not picking hits, they're picking deep cuts. Most of these songs are deep cuts from various albums through their entire career, but they're doing them, and instead of using electric guitars, they're using violins and cellos. Well, not violins and cellos, they're using more like mandolins and acoustic guitars. And for the keyboards, they're using things like violins and cellos. So they've reimagined it, taking out electric guitars, taking out keyboards, and playing alternate instruments. And it's and it works, and it's a spectacular spin. So there you go. There is a group that's not dead yet and still making spectacular music. Question number 16. An artist you miss. Well, an artist I miss, and we're coming back to Emerson, Lake and Palmer. I think I could have chosen a lot of people, but I think Emerson, Lake and Palmer is definitely one. And this is their debut album, another great debut album from an artist, and certainly in that proto-prog, early prog stages, because this album came out, I think, in when did this one come out? 1970. 1970. So this is very close to the beginning of prog. This is Emerson, Lake and Palmer's debut, with, of course, The Barbarian, Take a Pebble, Knife Edge, Tank, Lucky Man, and more. But yeah, definitely an artist I miss is, of course, Keith Emerson, brilliant keyboard player, and of course Greg Lake has gone as well, so the only person left is Carl Palmer. So definitely an artist I miss there, in both Greg and Keith. And of course, we can't talk about prog and talk about artists we miss without, of course, talking about Canada's own Rush. And I'm going to show Signals, because I love this album, Signals. A really proggy album from Rush. Signals, of course, Neil Peart, long gone but not forgotten. So there you go, a little bit of Rush, a little bit of Emerson, Lake and Palmer. So that was question number 16, an artist you missed. Now question number 17, Prog Goes Pop. Well, I showed you guys FM earlier in this video, Canadian prog band FM. Well, in the 80s, they would release this album, and I think this was around 1986 or 7. Do I have a date on this one, guys? 1987. And this is FM's Tonight album. I love this album. I absolutely love it, but it's pop all the way. This is pop all the way. I mean, obviously the prog influences are in here, but this is 100% pop all the way, with songs like Magic in Your Eyes, She Does What She Wants. I just love that song. They even do a version of the Beach Boys' Good Vibrations on here. So this is pop goodness from a prog band. I love Tonight, an underrated gem, another underrated gem, FM Tonight by the Canadian prog band FM. And just to show one other one that's very prog goes pop, you can't talk about prog goes pop without talking about things that Genesis did in the Alien, the Phil Collins area of Genesis. So I'm going to show Invisible Touch as well, which of course had a whole string of singles on it. Invisible Touch, Tonight, 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 which is very proggy. Land of Confusion was a single. Into Deep was a single. Throwing It All Away was a single. But it did have prog on here and things like Domino and the Brazilian. So definitely prog goes pop with Genesis' Invisible Touch. Question number 18. Show a prog album with cover art you love. We're going to go back to Saga, guys. I mean, there's so many. I mean, I have a lot of prog. I really do have a lot of different prog artists and albums. I focused in on just a few for this video, and I really wanted to showcase groups like Saga, because I think in the prog community, Saga is definitely, like I said, underrated and underappreciated. So it was my chance to showcase a lot of Saga stuff. And definitely Saga have some of the greatest album cover arts of all time for me. I love the album cover art that Saga does. The very first one I showed you with the moth on the cover, well, that moth is actually named Golden Boy. For people that know Saga, on the inner circle of Saga, that moth is named Golden Boy. And Golden Boy would appear on a lot of Saga album covers. Either in just some little tiny part of the album cover or in proud display on album covers. And definitely some of my favorite album covers are the ones with Golden Boy on them. Fantastic works of art. I love this album cover. I absolutely love. Definitely in my favorite album covers of all time. Saga's second album, Images of Twilight, of course, featuring Golden Boy ripping the top off of that building there. What a great, spectacular album cover that is. That was followed up by Saga's Silent Night. And we can see Golden Boy here on that one, on a very sci-fi, futuristic looking album cover there. Then going later into the 90s and 2000s, Golden Boy would reappear in full-blown form on the cover of some of their later albums, like Full Circle. This is a late 90s album. Full Circle would feature Golden Boy again. Just lovely, lovely cover art. And then a couple albums later, an album or so later, Golden Boy would appear on Saga's House of Cards album cover. But their album covers are spectacular album covers from Saga. Such great visuals. And one more Saga, just to throw it in here, from the 2000s, a 2000 Saga album featuring Golden Boy once again on this album, Marathon by Saga. So Golden Boy, heavily featured on the Saga album covers, and great works of art. And moving on to question number 19, an album you'd recommend to a non-prog fan. Well, I think this one stretches a lot of the questions once again. This is definitely got some pop, so this has got the Prog Goes Pop album on it. The Prog Goes Pop theme on it. It's an 80s album as well, so it ticks off that question. And it's Asia. And their debut album, Asia, which of course featured players from a lot of the bands I've shown you tonight. John Wetton, of course, who was from King Crimson, plays in here. Jeff Downs, who played on Yes's Drama album. And of course, Drama for me is one of my top 3 favorite Yes albums. Steve Howe is on here, and of course Carl Palmer is on here. So you know, this was a super group made up of some of the biggest prog bands of all time. This had the spectacular pop hit on it, In the Heat of the Moment. So this is definitely a very, very accessible album, and it really introduces you to some of the greatest prog players of all time. You know, people from Yes and Emerson, Lake and Palmer and King Crimson all married together on this album. So definitely an album you'd recommend to a non-prog fan is Asia and their debut album, self-titled album. And last but not least, your favorite prog album of all time. Well, I think people have already guessed it, and this is a different version of that album. This is from their brand new remasters, and of course this is Saga and their debut album, Saga, which is absolutely hands down my favorite prog album of all time. This is the recent remaster, and as you can see, it is autographed by the entire band. When I met Saga last summer, the entire band autographed my album, so that's why I'm showing 2 different versions of Saga's debut album. Definitely my favorite prog album of all time, but it's tied actually with another album, and I showed you the European version of this album earlier in the video, but this is the North American version that we got of Golden Earrings Moontown. This is absolutely 100% prog all the way. So I mean, it is really, really a tough tie between Saga, which is probably my favorite prog album of all time, and Golden Earrings Moontown, my favorite album by them of all time, and 100% prog. This is the North American version, and this also is celebrating its 50th anniversary in 1974, in 2024, as the North American version. Although this album came out in 1973 in Europe, it wouldn't hit our stores until April of 1974. So celebrating 50 years, the North American version of Moontan. That's it. That's all. Hope you enjoyed this video. I got one more tag I plan on doing coming up later this week. Hopefully I can get it made and out this week. Hope you enjoyed this. I'll see you in my next video. And as I always say, rock and roll.